So I am so glad to bring over to the show James Czerniawski. And let me just brag. Oh, here he is. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. How are you? I'm doing great.
Merry Christmas. So glad to have you back to Common Sense America.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. And yeah, happy holidays to you as well.
Oh, well, thank you. So, okay, all things politics here on the table. I'm looking at the USA Today article. We got Elon Musk, we got Twitter, we got Hunter Biden laptops, we got the left, we got the right. Give us your analysis on Twitter and what are we going to do with all of this as the American people? Talk to the moms here, talk to women in leadership here, talk to the kitchen table. What do we do with this?
Yeah, I just think that it's really a good time to just let everything simmer and process. I think a lot of the things that came out in the Twitter files were things that were already known, but not necessarily like conveyed to the public in the past in like a more meaningful way. This had been figured out through like FEC investigations and through Senate testimony from then CEO Jack Dorsey. But basically, during the 2020 election, as it's well known, Twitter and Facebook notably took different types of action to restrict the ability to share the New York Post story covering the contents of
Yep.
the Hunter Biden laptop. Now, at the time, part of the issue is that when that story was being pitched around to other outlets, they weren't necessarily comfortable with taking it on. There was questions about the provenance and the legitimacy of the actual information that was on this laptop. It was getting shared around in the form of like JPEGs and
Right.
screen grabs. So that creates like a little bit of uncertainty. So the New York Post ultimately is fine with running it. But it creates a problem on Twitter because
Mhm.
they don't realize, they don't know what exactly to do with this. They know that there's something that's out there. And in light of everything in the 2016 election, when you certainly did have Russian operations going on trying to influence some aspects of our elections, and that's something that did happen to a degree. And then in 2017, they had hacked materials get released during the French election season. They were under an immense amount of pressure to try to figure out what to do at that time. And I think what the Twitter files show best is that this was a company that, even when it made the decision it made, as the events continued to unfold, there was not any uniformity within the company itself in
Mhm.
terms of this decision. You saw employees questioning the policy decision that was made, whether or not they could actually stand behind that truthfully. And even to a point where you had a sitting member of Congress, to his credit, Representative Rokana, reaching out. Not that he's any Republican by any stretch of the definition, but he was
Mhm.
worried about the First Amendment
Right.
principles that were, being raised as a result of Twitter restricting access to this type of content.
Mhm.
I think that it was a very flawed policy
Mhm.
that Twitter had in terms of doing the hacked materials policy and restricting sharing of the link itself. And we, even within direct messages, usually that's something that's reserved for preventing the spread of child
Right.
pornography
Right.
materials. So it's definitely something that's very odd. It's very rare. And then it's just another one of those situations where, while it was dubbed misinformation by certain people at that time, as you get further removed from that nexus of the origin, you start realizing that, even mainstream media outlets like the New York Times and CNN, I believe, and some others were acknowledging the fact that it seems like there's actually some legitimacy to the contents that were on that laptop. And that goes in and just raises a whole bunch of other questions in terms of, how it was handled ultimately. And I think that the company acknowledges that it made the wrong mistake at the time, but they're in an impossible place. No matter what decision they would have made at
Mhm.
that time, they would have had everybody angry no matter what.
Mhm. Well, talk to me about big tech across the board and the censorship aspect because that really, every day I come to my audience every day and I hope and I say a little prayer before I even go on, and it is in reality. Am I going to get bumped off of YouTube? Am I going to get bumped off of Facebook because I say one word versus another? And yesterday I had a guest who tends to come on every once in a while, but every time they do, and the conversation is phenomenal, I get community strikes against me.
Mm.
So my question to you is, with your background in this, what is good for us, the American people, to say, you know what, I don't really care about Twitter. I don't even use it. Or what do I say to my parents' generation who wants to use Facebook? That's the only way they really communicate with their friends. And what do I say to my generation who watches YouTube versus watching TV and cable? So, breaking that down for my audience in the kitchen table discussion, what what is a best source, if you will, especially with conservatives being still censored in all of these platforms?
Yeah, and I think that it's really a give and take ultimately when you're looking at the decisions that these platforms are making, broadly speaking.
Yeah.
On Facebook, despite everything that they're doing, some of the most engaged pages are conservatives, whether that's the Dan Bongino show
Yeah.
or
Yep.
Ben Shapiro. All those pages tend to do very well
Yeah.
on Facebook, and conservatives have certainly boomed even on YouTube. Again, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, a lot of those guys do very well by that respect. So I think that if censorship is the objective, then in some pretty serious ways they're failing at that when it comes to critical voices in that space.
Hmm.
That's one side of the equation. The other is that I think that if you're a conservative, what you want to do is you want to go and put your message on as many different mediums as humanly possible. So,
Right.
notoriously, in light of all the actions that YouTube was taking, you saw the rise of Rumble.
Right.
And
Yes.
Rumble's done actually pretty solid in
Yes,
terms
they
of
have.
getting itself, up and off the ground, getting a decent number of daily active users and monthly active users, getting good engagement, including even having a current sitting senator and Rand Paul going and putting some of his stuff
Yes.
on that platform as well. So I think it's more about identifying, where are there opportunities for you to more directly connect with your audiences,
Hmm.
and basically, moving there.
Hmm.
And just also recognizing what these platforms are in terms of, sometimes how things play out. Like I know there's a great story from one of my friends where they were working at the company at the time, and they had a list of like words that they didn't want to
Yeah.
have included on like whatever, or you would see action taken on it. And one of the words was Dick, but then there's a book by a famous author, Moby Dick,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the algorithm accidentally struck down the whole thing. So sometimes I think what doesn't get realized is that it's an imperfect process with imperfect people that are trying to make a lot of decisions after the fact, and that certainly is hard. If you do have those kinds of problems, it's important to go and flag things, report them to the company. Engage in the appeals process that like Facebook does have and Twitter does have an appeals process too. You just go and leverage all the tools that those companies have at your disposal so that you can go and get content back up if you think it was wrongly taken down.
But do you think big tech has too much say in our freedom of speech? Do you think that they are just too involved, whereas even the government is too involved? It's almost like they're working hand in hand together.
Yeah, I think that they certainly have a large degree of power in terms of what they want to provide as permissible conversations on their platforms, and that's understandable. It's
Hmm.
their private property; they are not the government. They are not constrained by the First Amendment like the government would be.
Hmm.
I don't necessarily buy into the argument that they're the digital town square because if we applied that logic to Facebook, it doesn't really translate out well because to the point that you were outlining, it changes where the conversation is happening generationally speaking,
It
right?
does.
If my grandparents are on Facebook at a plurality and watching cable news, but you're watching YouTube and I'm watching Instagram Reels and TikTok,
Yeah.
your town square is a little murky at best, right? So I think
Very,
that you need to
very.
have a little bit of nuance and understanding that. I think that what you want to encourage the platforms to do, and you're starting to see this a little bit,
Uh,
is trying to localize more of these decisions. Whether that's by doing things like Birdwatch at Twitter, where the community is providing context to the tweets that are being put out there. So infamously, that happened for the White House when they put out a Social Security tweet where they were saying that under Joe Biden's leadership, President Biden's leadership, that seniors were getting the highest bump in Social Security in years. When in actuality, the community put the context there being that hey, he actually didn't do anything for this. This is just based off of the rate of inflation, and ultimately the White House had to go and delete that tweet, right? So it's actually a good check on the powers that may be and on some of these platforms or the government that wants to try to control a narrative. So I think trying to find opportunities where the community can be more engaged is certainly one way of going about it. And again, just and rather than having a more globalized conversation,
Yeah.
trying to bring it internal and have it within communities, more broadly speaking, I think is pretty important. I want to go and chat with people across the aisle, but I do think that it's not helpful if I don't necessarily know you. If everybody's just strangers on the internet in many ways,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
means that it's a less costly thing for me to be combative with you, for me to be incendiary, inflammatory, any of
Right.
that kind of stuff, because
Right.
I don't know you. The chances of me seeing you in real life is pretty slim to none. And that's something that I think has to get baked into the equation. So I think if we can, try to return back to us engaging in our communities, both on a state and local level,
Hmm.
in terms of that kind of a conversation and fostering and joining groups that promote things that are focusing on your community, I think that that can go a long way towards actually having a better semblance of speech being balanced, and also I think a little bit more tailored and great in terms of fostering good community and good conversation.
Because my next question for you was this, is the new Congress, and you think with lame duck is lame duck, but new Congress, 118th Congress, I wonder how involved they will be with big tech, with the new Republicans, and state. What would that look like? But you almost answered my question before I even asked it, because you said it really needs to come back to local community conversations versus the government having yet a hand in our pockets when it comes to this conversation, especially as big tech is intermingled there. I see, sitting here in North Carolina, I'm a northern girl in a southern world. I worked in DC for 20 years. Some people see me as now in the southern space. Oh, she's just in North Carolina. Not much happens there. But in actuality, a lot of things happen here. And when you look in the nation's backyard, you see kids suffering from teen suicide. You see mental health issues, and a lot of the conversations that I end up having end up going back to this smartphone, which I plainly say is flat out stupid because they're so involved in TikTok and all of those other things. But I digress. That's where my mentality is, because I think about next generation. I think about the communication, and I want to bring it back to your point, which I agree with you. We need to be coming back to a local community to conversation, because that is very important to the very fabric of our beings.
No, you're absolutely right, and I think that when you're looking at the congressional level of what's going to be considered in 2023, I think that there's
Mhm.
a pretty big caveat there in terms of what does our economic outlook look like
Yeah.
if we're in a recession. Even
Yeah.
if you do want to take action against some of the tech companies, I think that it makes it more difficult to prioritize that if people are hurting right now
Hmm.
because of a recession.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing, some early signs of pain coming. Just in the tech industry alone, there have been over 140,000 jobs collectively eliminated just from the tech sector
Uh-huh.
alone. And you're talking about Twitter with Elon buying it. That was a
Yep.
pretty big force reduction. Facebook eliminated over 10,000 jobs. Amazon eliminated over 10,000 jobs.
Yeah.
And now, just recently, I know PepsiCo, which is not in the tech sector, but you're seeing it kind of spread to other aspects of the economy. They're laying off people. So I think that if there's an economic hardship that's being seen in the first quarter of 2023, I
Mhm.
think that that's the priority more so than some of these tech issues. But given the majorities in Congress, it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic works out, because now we know we're going to have a 51-49 Senate, and we'll have a 6-seat majority, I believe, in the House. So we have to see how all that shakes out in terms of where the priorities ultimately land. But I'm sure you'll still see some of these same questions come up on either side. Where in the Senate, I might expect to see more antitrust stuff. On the
Mhm.
House side, I might expect to see more Section 230 oriented conversations. So I think that there's a lot that can be had in terms of what's going to happen there. But I think that it's best to wait and see and see what our economic outlook looks like in Q1, just because I think it's going to be very difficult, to go and focus on some of this if we have a looming recession.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Final word from you. What do you think Elon Musk's next move is going to be? Can you predict? What do you think he'll do next?
Yeah, I can't possibly predict what that man's going to do. He's his own separate lightning rod when it comes to Twitter and what he's done with the company so far. He's going to continue to try to work on Twitter Blue and figure out how he wants to implement that to democratize the blue check, if you will.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes, and hopefully he can make the company profitable. We've seen already the return of some advertisers who had done boycotts, and Apple and Amazon is resuming advertising, and CNN, or sorry, it wasn't CNN. I think it was like MSNBC.
Hmm.
They took a pause or whatever for a weekend, and they came back. So it's just stuff to monitor. I think that it's just about him trying to figure out how to make Twitter his vision and to
Right.
execute on that, and then appointing a CEO to go and carry it out moving forward.
Right, right. Well, James Czerniawski, Young Voices contributor, senior tech innovation policy analyst at American for Prosperity. Thanks for always coming over, and I love the conversation. It is so fabulous. Thank you for talking kitchen table topics for my audience. I'm so grateful for you. I hope you have a fabulous holiday season. I look forward to seeing you back here soon.
Thanks for having me, and happy holidays to you and your viewers as well.
Thank you, sir. Bye bye.
Bye.